Good morning. Good morning. Uh, so I'm gonna wait just a couple moments because we like to wait just a couple moments just in case folks are scurrying to their devices and starting to hook up to the stream. I hope you're doing that. Truly, I do. I'll make a couple of adjustments here. Usually, I get to be sort of the tech assistant behind Teresa, who delivers flaming commentary and fabulous headline news. Then I sort of switch over at the end and give a little community wrap up and spiritual oversight for the week. today, today we're going to say I'm a one person show. So let me talk about that for a moment. As we are gathering in, I called this episode Taking Care of Yourself is Taking Care of the World. And I want to start off by just giving a little talk about self care. We know as conscious beings in this world, we know that the news is by and large dreadful these days, even more dreadful than usual in this last month. And we'll talk about that news. We'll talk about a big overview of that news. But I really want to encourage folks that constantly to expose oneself without end to the horrific news that is happening doesn't actually help. It's important to stay informed. I'm not saying that we get to go play ostrich and just sort of drink mai tais and look at the sunsets without actually thinking about the world and how to make it a better place. I think that we all are called. It is our duty, it's our obligation, it's our responsibility to life that we try to leave this world a better place. That said, the act of doom scrolling, the act of always seeking out the worst news because we need to know what's happening and somebody needs to go and tell the people, that's a heavy, heavy thing to do. And I would actually encourage no one to do it full time. So that brings me to the ever popular why am I here alone this morning? Because I was encouraging my beloved to maybe try some relaxation this week, maybe process all of the horrific news that we know exists before taking in a whole lot more. And I recommend that really to most people. If you are finding yourself super anxious, more anxious than usual, depressed, upset, near to tears, that would describe most of the people I know this week, myself included. And I think that there's a lot of reasons for that, but primarily, we're looking at the stress of living in a very inhumane world. We're looking at the stress of living in an existential crisis of climate change. We are living in the existential democratic crisis of, are we going to take a hard right into fascism in our country in the next year? We are looking at systems that we have thought were relatively strong, if not perfect. They're pretty imperfect, but at least there. We're looking at them being eroded. We're looking at just quite horrific news, right? How do we deal with that as people? Well, we need to hang on to each other. We know that we only have each other to really support ourselves and to come to. And we also know that our ability to affect change happens most effectively. We have the most power in our own backyard. So, how can we make our own backyards a better, more welcoming, more humane system? How can we make our own backyards uh, an example for the rest of the world? And how can we make our communities resilient enough to withstand the challenges of the climate crisis and the economic crises that are happening. Okay, so those are the questions I start off with. I congratulate Teresa on actually taking this week off. Um, she said, "Well, I can't stop looking at this horrific news. I have the show to do." And I thought, no, actually, all workers need a day off. All workers need some time off. All people need to take the time to assimilate the information that they hold and to process it before they take on more. And so, with that, I support Teresa in taking this week off. And perhaps in this next week, you also want to take a moment away from a screen, take a moment, take a whole day away from news updates. If something huge happens, maybe you're on a list that would get a text, an emergency text for some sort of emergency action. But probably, even if something huge happens, it can go a day without you actually knowing about it. It's still going to be there the next day. And how can we really affect change? How can we take this information we have and do something with it? Again, community organizing, helping local communities be resilient, strengthening local policies where we have the most power makes sense to me. Also, calling our congressional representatives and telling them to do the right thing, the moral thing. That is also super important right now. And so, without any more further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get to some news. So, this is now Bridge to a Better World. I am Ani Ravenades. I don't know if I mentioned that right up top, but there it is. There I am. It's who I am. First, some kind of encouraging news. The UAW is really close to settling with Ford. This is great. The workers are backing at this point. If the rank and file actually vote in favor of the agreement reached by management and the union reps this week, that Ford strike will end. And in that agreement, the workers will get an additional 25% general wage increase. And when that's combined with the cost of living increase, it actually results to better than 30% of a wage increase by the end of that contract. Before the strike, Ford started out by offering a 9% increase. So talks are now intensifying with that settlement being close to hand with the other US automakers. And I'm going to say that difference between that offer from Ford, the largesse of the company, to offer 9% increase to its workers, now going to more than a 30% increase because of the union efforts, right? Led by Sean Fain. Love that man's name. That I'm going to say unions for the win, right? Unions, workers together being strong, collectively organizing. We are stronger together, right? We know that. So, in other labor news, Kaiser pharmacy techs are still on strike against the healthcare giant. How well I know, as a Kaiser member and frequent flyer, let's say. The pharmacy techs have been out since October 1st, and last week the UFCW, United Food and Commercial Workers Union 555, notified Kaiser of a ULP strike for members working under the imaging services contract. So these professionals include X-ray techs. They include mammography, MRI, CAT scans, nuclear medicine, EEG, cardiovascular lab, special procedures technologists, sonographers, dosimetrists, radiation therapists, and imaging assistants. Those folks are scheduled to strike starting November 1st. That's next week. These workers are striking for better pay and better working conditions, specifically calling out Kaiser's practice of chronically understaffing critical staffing needs. That means workers are having to do work at a terrifying pace. And again, remember our health. actually relies on these workers being taken care of, these workers having a reasonable pace, these workers not being stressed out and forced to work beyond what any worker should be asked to do, hours wise or just quickness, processing wise. So, backing the Kaiser Pharmacy strikes, letting Kaiser membership know that as Kaiser members, we are deeply dissatisfied with the healthcare giants' inability to reach a fair settlement with their striking workers. And I'm just going to remind y'all that Gregory Adams, the chairman and CEO of Kaiser, made upwards of $17 million a couple years ago, the last time that there are facts and figures reported on the internet. His salary was over $15.5 million. And then he had a couple $1 million, what do we call those things? Bonus, a couple $1 million bonus, in addition to his over $15 million salary. Increase the frickin' worker's salary and increase the number of workers you have to take care of your members and your patients. Okay, that's my message to Kaiser. I also want to do a real quick look at the dire climate news this week. Again, I don't want to forget anything. And I know that climate change, it's here, it's happening. We need to be aware of it. And a couple of really frightening things have happened this week. One of them is Hurricane Otis. If you have heard of Hurricane Otis, that is a hurricane that hit Acapulco as a Category 5 storm. The really unusual thing about Hurricane Otis is usually when a hurricane hits land, as I am informed, it usually downgrades just a little bit as it hits land. It usually slows just a little bit as it comes to the land. This hurricane, in fact, grew exponentially faster than any hurricane previously recorded, I understand. And it went from being a little tropical storm that no one really was looking at to less than 24 hours later being a being a hurricane at a Category 5, hitting and devastating the southern Pacific coastline of Mexico, hitting at Acapulco, or just a little bit, a few miles from Acapulco as its landfall point. Devastating fishing communities, devastating the coastline, devastating Acapulco, which is a fairly major tourist destination, and major infrastructure in that city. All communication efforts were lost for nearly a day as people were trying to ascertain what happened, what the damage was. So that's huge, right? To go from a little tropical storm to a Category 5 earthquake in a day and to hit land as a Category 5 earthquake, devastating the area that was unable to receive warnings because there was no warnings to be received. No one was that concerned about it until suddenly it hit. It didn't really give advance notice of its intention, let's just say. And we're going to find that more and more as the climate, as the weather systems are destabilized through heating up, through extra energy in the system. The other storm that really caught my attention is the tropical cyclone Tesh. It's displaced thousands of people in Yemen. Yemen, an area known for being dry, right? It's an arid land. And so when a tropical cyclone hit, dumping about 16 inches of rain in 24 hours, it has displaced thousands of people who are trying to escape the devastation of the winds and the flooding in the area. To my knowledge, this is only the second time that Yemen has actually been hit with a tropical cyclone. So again, most unusual and devastating, extreme weather patterns. So please work for climate justice, work for an end to the giant fossil fuel industries and the disinformation campaigns thereof. We know this. Um, let us continue to act in concert, to do what we can to draw attention to this and to end the destructive practices, to start putting forth anything that can mitigate the harm being done with the climate catastrophe. And now I want to talk about war, and not just any war. War, I've been, how do we say, a peace activist since I was 13 years old. Um, the first thing I ever did politically was attempt to, well, attempt. We did. A bunch of high school students organized a rally to counter, at that point, Carter's uh, return to draft registration for all young men. Uh, I was against it because the draft means that the U.S. forces will strengthen and be involved in more war, was my 13-year-old reasoning. And I gotta say, I'm still with her. I think my 13-year-old self had that right. So I want to talk about war. And most specifically, I want to talk about what's happening right now in Israel, in Gaza, in the current iteration of the conflict, as some people call it. And I'm going to start off with a definition of genocide. I'm going to first of all say, again, you're watching This Is Now, Bridge to a Better World. I'm Ani Raven Haynes. My cohort and usual co-host and beloved life partner, Teresa, is taking the week off for self-care. And I think, again, I encourage everyone to do what you need to do to take care of yourself in these times of dire, dire news. So, what do I want to say about that? I'm going to get back to the definition. Oh, if you're watching this video, please do hit the like button. And please subscribe to our channel. If you haven't before, we're at 69 subscribers. Let's go ahead and see if we can get more. Thank you. Now about genocide. All right. So the definition of genocide in Article 2 of the Genocide Convention is the result of a negotiated compromise reached among United Nations member states in 1948. It's when the convention was actually drafted. In the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. It means again, with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, the national, ethnical, racial, or religious groups by killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction, in whole or in part, and imposing measures intended to prevent birth within the group, as well as or forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. I'm going to say that the current acts of violence towards all people in Gaza seem to me to pass this terrible test. It shocks my conscience. It shocks my conscience that this is happening in the open, that this is happening today in this age where the words never again are words that people from my generation and certainly generations after me have grown up with. That's in our consciousness. Never again will we allow atrocities to be committed. We have seen what genocide looks like, and it's bad. Never again. And yet, here we go. While the world watches, with many, many leaders in the Western world supporting it, including with the support of military assistance. And for the most part, Western media has been complicit. If you are listening to mainstream press and you're hearing reports that dehumanize Palestinians, Remember that that dehumanization effort makes genocide possible. Remember that truth is always the first casualty of war, and that the disinformation campaigns and misinformation campaigns and propaganda about the righteous, holy winning side is pretty thick right now. And it's disturbing. I want to quote Judith Butler, who was interviewed on Democracy Now! Judith Butler is a scholar, professor. Uh, they've written extensively on gender, feminism, and gender theories for 40 years. And they have, as a Jewish person, have signed on to letters calling for a ceasefire to this genocidal act. And they say Palestinian civilians are not being recognized as Palestinians. In other words, when you've accomplished rhetorically through the media the identification of Palestine with terrorism and all Palestinians with terrorism, barbarism, and animality, then there are no civilians in the imagination of those doing violence to them. That's a falsehood, and it must be opposed. I want to mention that the UN Relief and Works Agency says that it has been sharing its own dwindling supplies of fuel to keep life-saving hospital equipment running and deliveries moving. A spokesperson asked a reporter from the Associated Press who was interviewing them, do we give the fuel for incubators or bakeries? That's an excruciating decision. I'm going to say no one should have to make that decision. You should not, as a power, as a state, you should not be able to cut fuel, to cut electricity, to cut infrastructure necessary for life from an occupied territory. Right? Again, doing so, I believe, constitutes an act of genocide. This week, Oxfam accused Israel of intentionally starving Gaza's 2 million people. Oxfam's regional Middle East director said the situation is nothing short of horrific. He asks where the humanity is. He says millions of civilians are being collectively punished in full view of the world. There can be no justification for using starvation as a weapon of war. True. I'm going to agree. It goes on and on. There was a live broadcast on Al Jazeera in Al Jazeera Arabic this week when Gaza bureau chief learned that his wife and his daughter and his son had been killed in an Israeli airstrike. His toddler-aged grandson was pronounced dead shortly thereafter. They were killed by a missile that flattened the home where the family had been sheltering from Israel's around-the-clock bombardment. The family had fled Israel's bombardment of their neighborhood in the north to seek shelter in the south, where the Israeli government had told people to go. They had followed those orders. They sought shelter in a central southern city, in the Nusret refugee camp in central Gaza. Again, following those orders to evacuate to the south. And still, they were bombed. This man's entire family killed. The attack came as Axios reported that the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, that's right, our Secretary of State, Blinken, recently asked Qatar's Prime Minister to tone down Al Jazeera's coverage of the war. Because you don't want people to be informed by all sides or anything. You don't want information to get out that might be damning to the acts of our allies, right? Because it's damning. to actually see the truth about what's going on in this area and to recognize the human suffering that is going on just astronomical scales. Antonio Guterres, the UN, sorry, the UN Secretary General, has said that just as the Palestinian people cannot justify the appalling attacks by Hamas, those attacks cannot justify the appalling collective punishment of the Palestinian people. As no surprise to anyone, Israel has condemned these comments and it's threatening to stop issuing visas to UN representatives. And the Israeli ambassador to the UN is calling for Guterres' resignation. Again, Gutierrez did call out the appalling attacks of the weekend of October 7th, the appalling attacks by Hamas. Those need to be called out. They were appalling. That was anti-civilian action. Anti-civilian action must be opposed. But as Mehdi Hassan said, the idea that we can kill Palestinian children, it's a paraphrase here, it's a rough paraphrase, but the idea that to avenge the killing of Israeli children with the killing of Palestinian children, to say that that's fair, that road is madness, right? We cannot justify genocide because a group of people did something that was horrific. We have international courts, we have conduct, right, that is proscribed so that we would, in fact, never again see genocide. So, meanwhile, in the occupied West Bank, not Gaza, in the occupied West Bank, an Israeli drone strike on the Jenin refugee camp has killed at least 3 Palestinians. I believe that was yesterday or Wednesday. I'm sorry, I've gotten my dates confused. But that's this week, in the last couple of days. Moreover, Israeli security forces and settlers have killed at least 100 Palestinians in the West Bank since the October 7th attacks. Right? That's in the West Bank. Over 100 Palestinians have been killed by security forces and settlers. There's a horrific video currently of a settler just shooting a Palestinian man point blank in the West Bank, and that's been circulating for a couple of days now. So, what to do in this horrific time? On the last point, let us demand ceasefire. Let us demand a ceasefire right now. There are wonderful, usually very progressive people who have not signed on to a call for a ceasefire because they are conflicted. They are feeling like they can't really do that unless Hamas releases all hostages. That somehow or another doing that before that time is giving in to those that don't value human life. There's so much to be said about that. A couple things to be said is collective punishment of an entire people is never justified. Collective punishment of a civilian base is never justified by the acts of some armed resistance, armed radicals, armed whatever you want to call Hamas. Their actions do not justify the collective punishment of over 2 million people in Gaza. Over 7,000 people have been killed in Gaza, right? So we cannot continue justifying this horrific, violent war by saying, oh, we want to make sure those hostages get released. Also, those hostages are directly in harm's way. Calling for a ceasefire at this time does more to protect them because Israel doesn't know where they are being held, and they're shelling a lot of Gaza. They're reducing buildings and neighborhoods to rubble. Calling for a ceasefire now helps to protect the hostages that have been held by Hamas. I want to say that there is, in fact, a call for a ceasefire, that there is a resolution being introduced to the House by Representative Cori Bush, and it has been signed on to by these extremely brave congressional reps, and I want to give them all props. Cori Bush, Rashida Tlaib, Andre Carson, Summer Lee, Dalia Ramirez, Jamal Bowman, Bonnie Watson Coleman, Jesus Chuy Garcia, Jonathan Jackson, Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Ariana Presley, and Nydia Velasquez. Thank you all for preserving your own humanity and for calling for a ceasefire now in this area, in this conflict, in this genocide. I want us to call our congressional reps. I want us to call Blumenauer. I want us to call Wyden. I want us to call the Congress folks. I want us to call everyone can. Jamie Raskin has surprised me and disappointed me by insisting that the hostages are released before he's able to support a ceasefire. I want us to call all of our progressive allies in Congress, in the Senate, to ask them to demand that is not a condition, that's not helping, and that we, in fact, all join together in asking and demanding for a ceasefire now. I don't want to be complicit in genocide, and I'm going to suggest neither do you. So, what can we do? We're halfway around the world. Well, in our system of government, what we can do is put pressure on our elected officials. We can demonstrate, we can put pressure, we can write letters, but in fact, in this case, also, almost as importantly, we can talk to our friends, our families, and our neighbors and call out genocide for what it is and speak against the propaganda that dehumanizes Palestinian people. That is something we can do, each and every one of us. Speak out against the dehumanization of Palestinian people. Advance human rights around the world. It seems like such a little thing, and yet it's huge. As more and more people are able to see through what's going on, we can demand action together. That's what we got. And with that, I'm going to shift. I'm going to shift into the season. It's Samhain, y'all. Samhain, otherwise known as Halloween, is happening next week. Samhain is the Celtic tradition. It's of the Celtic tradition of honoring our dead. It is a word that means the summer's end. It's that time that we mark the end of one year and let the earth lie fallow for 6 weeks to be reborn at the time of winter solstice. And it's a powerful time to connect with our ancestors. It's a powerful time to connect with our loved ones who have crossed over. It's a powerful time to meditate, to vision, to dream, to go deep within yourself, to face the shadow. I encourage all of that. I encourage you to please make an altar and honor those who have passed on. Your personal ancestors, your friends and family that have passed, animal companions that have passed, honor them at this time. Many traditions talk about feasting with the dead and making sure that we keep our connection strong, both going into the past with our ancestors as well as looking to our future and the next generations, realizing that we are but one link in the chain. And that's one of the reasons why we have all the responsibility in the world to make this world a better place. And to make an ancestor altar, uh, find a space in your heart that you can, in fact, arrange pictures of your dearly departed, maybe news clippings about them or about other people who have passed on that you admire that may not have been a part of your personal family. Um, Friends and family members, their pictures, also mementos, little gifts that they've given you or you've given them that have found their way back to you since their passing. Uh, those little items that you feel great connection to, when you hold, your great Aunt Doris's earrings and you're like, "Ah, Aunt Doris," put those on that altar, right? And then at least during Samhain, during, Halloween night, uh, leave some offerings there. Make a cup of tea, cup of coffee, whiskey sour, whatever they would have wanted, and, leave it out for them. Maybe remember them, have some people over, talk about them, have a second wake. Uh, do what you can do to celebrate your connection with your ancestors, with your dearly departed, and also to honor your connection as an ancestor. You are, in fact, a future ancestor, and, to honor your connection to the future generations and your obligation to this world. That's my advice for Samhain, for the season. And with that, let's get to the tarot reading for the day. We have the Ace of Wands. Oh, kitty, happy dancing kitty. We have the Two of Wands in first. Oh, kitty, perhaps a little confused by your dancing. And then we have Strength. And what do all these cards mean? Well, looking at them together, they mean this. To me, what it means, remember, we are strong. We are strong enough to, in fact, take care of ourselves, to take care of our community, and again, in that way, taking care of the world, taking care of ourselves as members of this world, of this community, taking care of others in our community, being strong together, sharing resilience, remembering that we are strong, we are wild, we are undaunted in the face of hardship, right? Do not daunt. Um, we, in fact, have great power and great strength when we work together. And how should we work together? Well, what we have here in the Ace of Wands and the Two of Wands, it's that call to really follow your passions, right? Your passions are totally, you are in touch with them. You are awash in this creative, passionate energy to do something to affect change. The thing is to decide how to do that. And that is that is this little guy right here. How? Now that you know all that needs to be done, now that you feel it deep in your bones, how? And so the lesson of that card is feeling your strength and picking a spot and starting. Whether that's calling a friend and having a deep conversation so that you can offload your feelings, so that you can process feelings with them, so that you can share information. Maybe it's that. Maybe it is contributing to a community pantry or food, food bank, a community local-based food bank. Like maybe a neighbor has a fridge on the corner, and you're going to put some food in it. Something that is a very localized effort to help those in immediate need around you. Maybe it is reaching out and creating a community art project or an art project in your house. Maybe it is, I don't know, what is calling you. Pick something. And this week, create, do it, go for it, speak it, write it, be it. Know that you are strong and that we are stronger together, and working together, we can affect amazing change in our own backyard and around the world. This I believe. And with that, thank you all for joining us. I'm going to say, I think I did something like disabled the chat when I was hurriedly making this page. So I'm sorry that we have not been able to engage in chat for whatever reason. But thank you for joining me. Thank you for being there. Please do pass this video around. Hit the like button as you can. And you'll see us again next week, where we will be back with another fine episode of This Is Now Bridge to a Better World. Our love goes out to you and to all the ships at sea. Blessings.